And I want us to shift our attention, back to, our message, right? The message that we have been walking through that is the book of Hebrews. And those words that we have been talking about that will draw us back from the edge of that cliff. And this morning we tackle another one, and that word is better. But before we get there, I want to pause again for just a moment and have us consider whether any of us have ever felt like we were on the edge of a cliff. It seems like, we've been talking about this since the beginning of the year, but maybe we just need help understanding whether we are one of those that is at the edge of that cliff. So let me say this. If you have ever had to choose whether you would pay your rent or buy groceries, then you know what the edge of a cliff is like. If you have ever sat in a doctor's office or in a hospital room and you have heard, the doctor say that either you or a loved one has a serious medical condition, then you know what it is like to be on the edge of a cliff. If you have ever felt like you have done everything that you know how to do, and you still can't seem to get ahead, you still can't seem to get past this roadblock in your life, then you understand what we're talking about when we're saying, we're talking about the edge of a cliff. Have you ever felt like your life was just kind of spinning out of control, where things were beyond your ability to hold on to? Well, then you know what it is like to live on the edge of a cliff. If you've ever struggled with addiction, where no matter what you try, you just can't seem to break free of that yourself, then you know what it's like to live on the edge of a cliff. And maybe you find yourself, if you've ever been there, where you find yourself in a battle with your spouse, where your home feels more maybe like a battlefield than a place of refuge, then you know what it is like to live on the edge of a cliff. If you carry around with you, the burdens of your past, maybe hurts or scars that have been inflicted by others, then you know what it is like to live on the edge of a cliff. If that past haunts you, maybe reminds you over and over and over again of the things that you have done, then you know what it is like to live on the edge of a cliff. These are just some things that take us right there, that cause us to feel like that there is no hope. Maybe you can relate to this group of people, because it does happen in our day. This group of people, this group of believers who found themselves struggling, not just with that list that I just gave us, not just with the regular stuff of life, but they were struggling because of the challenges they were facing because they had decided to follow Jesus. Their families were ridiculing them. The community in which they were living was ostracizing them. Some of them couldn't even do business, in their communities because of their faith in Jesus, because they didn't worship in the right way anymore. You see, they understood what it was like to be on the edge of a cliff, just like many of us do. And it's in those moments, I think, when we pray and it seems like God is silent. Have you ever been there? Have you ever cried out to God and He doesn't seem to answer? It's in those times when we ask, but no one around us seems to have the answers to why we are suffering. And it's in those moments when we open our Bibles, searching for an answer, searching, for something just to jump off the page at us, and nothing seems to be there. In those times, more, I think, than at any other time in our lives, these are the times when we need hope. Is that not true? It was interesting. I kind of went down a rabbit hole this last week as I was preparing and kind of studying for some of this, and I ended up reading, a Psychology Today magazine. And here's an article that I came across. It said this: psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, some of you may recognize the name. He's one who survived the Auschwitz Nazi death camps. He wrote about his experiences, explaining this, that there is always a choice, that emotional health is influenced by the attitudes that we choose, the decisions that we make, and the desire to look forward rather than backward. Did we hear that? I mean, this is a guy who understands what the edge of a cliff is like, right? I mean, I'm not sure that any of us would compare our current circumstances to living in one, I'm not sure if you could call it living, but being in one of those Nazi death camps. He understands. But you heard what he said, right? A desire to look forward rather than backward. It is hope that he is talking about. And it amazed me as I dug into a little bit of this, whether it be in the world of psychology or the world of in the psychiatric world, it amazes me how they understand how desperately our world needs hope. And yet, many of them, most I would argue, come at that and approach this from a very secular vantage point, who don't understand the kind of hope that we do, the kind of hope that we understand. And yet they see and recognize its desperate need. According to the dictionary, Webster, defines hope as this: it is to desire with expectation of obtainment or fulfillment. In other words, it is to expect something with confidence. It is to trust. I mean, do you hear that? Again, as I thought through some of this, I could not escape the reality that hope and faith and trust, you can't really pull those things apart, can you? I mean, they are so closely tied together that you end up using one of those words and one of those ideas to explain the other, because you just can't pull them apart. You see, hope comes from the conviction that no matter how difficult today is, tomorrow will be better. And for a believer, for those of us who have placed our faith in Jesus Christ, hope finds its roots in the very character and the very nature of who God is. And that hope ultimately finds its fulfillment in looking forward to a day, if you turn to the latter part of the book of Revelation, where it says, and there will be a day when God will what? He will wipe away every tear. You see, that is where our hope ultimately lies. A day when we will sit down at a banquet table, we are told, prepared by Jesus himself. It is expecting that one day we will find rest in the very presence of the living God. The very rest that the author of Hebrews spoke about just a few weeks ago, a few chapters ago, where he talked of the rest of God. So let me say this: if your level of hope is based upon your current circumstances, then I would say this: you are likely finding yourself on the very edge of a cliff. If the level of your hope is based upon what others or the way others treat you, well, then I would say you are likely on the edge of a cliff. You see, because not all hope is equal. We understand that, don't we? We can place our hope in something, but not all hope is equal. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, in what do we place our hope? In who do we place our hope? Again, I would say, if your level of hope is based upon your health, if the level of your hope is based upon your finances, if it is based upon your relationship, if it is based upon how many toys you have parked in your yard, or a host of other reasons and things that we could put on that list, then you are likely on the edge of a cliff. Because those things are unreliable. Those things are fragile. They will break. They will shatter. Those things are temporary. But if your hope is built on something else, if it is built on something better, then does not everything change? See, the author of that song, maybe you will recognize the words where it says, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness." Have you heard that song before? You heard those words? Sorry? That's the newer version of it, yes. It is Christ the solid rock, right? I mean, that's the old hymn, right? The author of that hymn, I think he was reading Hebrews when he wrote that. Now, I don't know if that's true, but just listen to one of the other verses where it says this: His oath, His covenant, His blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, He then is all my hope and stay. I mean, doesn't that reflect, what we've been talking about, what we've been reading about, what we've been studying in Hebrews? Listen, as I read this next section in chapter 7, beginning in verse 18, and see if you don't hear reflections of that, of those very words. In verse 18, it says this: "For on one hand, there is an annulling of the former commandment because of its weakness and unprofitableness. For the law made nothing perfect. On the other hand, there is the bringing in of a better hope, through which we draw near to God. And inasmuch as He was not made priest without an oath, for they have become priests without an oath, but He with an oath by Him who said to Him, 'The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek.' By so much more, Jesus has become a surety of a better covenant. Also, there were many priests because they were prevented by death from continuing. But He, because He continues forever, has an unchangeable priesthood. Therefore, He is also able to save to the utmost those who come to God through Him, since He always lives to make intercession for them. For such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens, who does not need daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for His own sins and then for the people's. For this He did once for all, when He offered up Himself. For the law appoints as high priests men who have weakness, but the word of the oath which came after the law appoints the Son who has been perfected forever." Now, once more, we kind of step into the middle of the author's message, right? And again, I would remind us that this is not, the Apostle Paul who sat down and wrote this theological treatise that he wants the believers to understand. No, our author is a pastor who has a heart for these believers who are on the edge of a cliff, and he wants to encourage them. And so when we open up the book of Hebrews, it really is just one sermon. It's one message. And every time we step back into it on a Sunday morning, we're stepping into the middle of it. And once more, we find him, pointing those that he is so concerned about, those that he cares so deeply about, he's concerned about them, because they're on the edge of that cliff. And he wants to pull them back and put their feet back on solid ground. And once more, we find him pointing them forwards, pointing them towards the identity of the one they are in danger of walking away from. Remember, this group of believers, because of their circumstances, because of the challenges that they are facing, they were threatening to walk away. They were threatening to step away from their faith and go back to Judaism. Well, he points them to the very one that they are in danger of walking away from, because everything hinges on who he is. And I hope we've got that, at least, as we've walked through, a little better, I think, than half of this message so far. I mean, it's been all about who Christ is. That's what he keeps doing. You see, in the mind of the author, as this pastor writes this message to them, the choice before them is clear. I mean, it's like, how in the world could you possibly choose something else? He says, on one hand, this old covenant that you want to go back to, this old way of doing things, it's been annulled. And all through this passage, he explains why. Why has this been annulled? It was weak, he said. It was unprofitable, he said. It was not complete, he said. It was repetitive, he said. It was unstable, he tells us. It made nothing perfect, he says. And it had too many priests, and they didn't last. Why? Because they were mortal, just like you and I. And this is why, one of the reasons over the coming weeks, we're going to zero in on that word better. because this new covenant is so much better in so many ways. It not only offers us a better hope that we see today, but it brings a better way that we will see in next week. Because it's got a better plan. It brings a better sacrifice. And ultimately for us, it's a better deal. I mean, it's just a better deal. And who doesn't like a better deal? You see, he says on one hand, the old has been annulled. But on the other, the bringing in of a better hope. You see, he goes on to tell us that this hope is alive. This hope is not like the old. This hope is strong. This hope is profitable. This hope is perfect. It is complete. It is stable. And this hope is not handed down from one priest to another. It is complete and it is final. He says it is once for all. It's better in every way. And he goes, pretty much point by point, every way where the old covenant was lacking, he highlights how this new covenant is so much better. It's a better hope the author lays out for them. Better, he would set out in front of us. Because this one comes into being not by one priest passing down to another, but by the appointment of God himself. I mean, we get that, don't we? I mean, that was the whole reason why he zeroed in on this guy named Melchizedek. It wasn't that he wanted to confuse us with it. It's not about Melchizedek. It is about how God appointed him. You see, the promise, the oath that the author speaks of, the oath of God is stronger than any inherited position that these priests might have had. And with his appointment, that is Jesus' appointment as high priest, Jesus has become, it's just amazing to even consider. He has become the co-signer of this new deal. He's become the guarantee of this new deal. He's become the surety, this translation says, of this new deal, this better deal. I mean, how is that for amazing? That this one that we have been talking about, this one that the author of Hebrews has been highlighting for us and setting out in front of us, he is the one who stepped in and said, I will guarantee this deal. I will be the one who signs on the dotted line for anyone who would accept it. It's a better hope the author lays out. Better because this high priest, Jesus, he's fine. He's just talking back to me. This high priest, Jesus, he's not like these other priests who would die and then somebody else would be appointed and they would die and somebody else would be appointed. No, he lives forever. He is eternal. We caught that at the very beginning of this, right? He's the one who holds up, all the worlds, Hebrews tells us. This is the one who now stands in the gap between us and a holy God. He is the one who makes intercession on our behalf. He is the one who gave himself as a payment for our sin. This one that he talks about, this one, it's all about who he is. And this one saves not only completely, but he saves forever. Forever. That means you don't have to go back and do this again. You don't have to come back and renew your salvation. Once it's been given to you, once it's been granted, once the blood of Christ has been applied to your life, you can't scrape it off. It's there. It is a lasting salvation that he offers, not just a covering up of our sin. And we'll dive into some of this a little more as we get closer to Easter, as we unpack even more of the implications of how much better this new covenant is. Because the old covenant, all it did is just put one patch over another. All it did is remember we talked about that a few weeks ago, I think, about just making the minimum payment on a credit card, right? That's all it did. Where he came in and paid the whole thing. You see, again, we come back to the reality of who he is. It's all about this. You see, this is a message designed to bring them back from the edge of the cliff, right? Remember, all those things, all those circumstances, all those reasons why sometimes we find ourselves on the edge of a cliff? You see, this is the New Testament's answer to discouragement. This is the New Testament's answer to the challenges of our lives. And it is to the person and work of Jesus Christ that the author points us. He doesn't tell them even once, I don't believe, not in the whole message to the Hebrews. He does not tell them that, you know what, if you just pray enough, God will take away all of the difficulties from your life. He doesn't say that. He doesn't tell them, if you just pray enough, if you just live a righteous enough life, you're not going to struggle anymore. He doesn't say that at all. But what he does do is he points them towards who Jesus is. And I would say to us that no matter what it is that has brought you to the very edge of that cliff today, that is the same answer. It is the same solution that he would point us towards. Who Jesus is and what he has done. Because when that is where our hope rests, everything changes. There really is, there's no way to overemphasize this reality and this truth. But if we miss this, we miss everything. If we somehow skip over this, if we somehow don't catch this, then we miss it all. Because again, this isn't about a priest named Melchizedek. This isn't about finding somebody to blame or even being able to explain away the reasons for our circumstances. This isn't about learning some interesting theological information. This is about who Jesus is and how that reality impacts our lives. Because it's in Him and in Him only that we find this better hope. It's not in information. It's not in anything else, but in the person of Jesus Christ. You see, there is a reason why our enemy seeks to confuse us and distract us from this reality. There is a reason that some of the most successful cults, those that thrive even in this city, they focus in on who Jesus is. They focus in on the deception of who Jesus is. And if he can confuse us there, if he can get us to believe in a different Jesus, he might use the same name, but he is not the same one. See, if he can convince us to believe that as one, book would read, that Jesus was a God among many, if he can get us to believe that, then our hope is gone. It is gone. Because if we lose sight of who he is, our hope goes with that. If our enemy can get us to believe that somehow Jesus is less, that maybe as some do, that he was just a good man, or he was a prophet. He might even be a great prophet. See, if our enemy can get us to believe those things, then our hope is gone. You see, if we hold even our past higher than we do him, our hope is gone. If we hold, this is what was happening here. If we hold our traditions, if we hold, our best thinking, if we hold these things higher than him, then our hope is weakened. And if we call into question things like his humanity, if we buy into the lie that says, well, Jesus wasn't completely human, well, then our hope is gone. Because what does the author of Hebrews remind them of? He reminds them that Jesus he understands us in our suffering. He understands us in our temptation. He gets it. You see, if we lose sight of those things, then our hope is weakened. If we ignore the fact that, many of these things that the author of Hebrews has been highlighting for us, things like that he is the Word of God, who is sharper than any two-edged sword. If we forget that He is so sharp that He can divide in us between our thoughts and our motives. I mean, we can't even do that. You see, if we buy into that, then our hope is weakened. If we fail to take advantage of the reality that He has laid over and over and over again for us in this message, if we fail to realize that ultimately our rest is not found here, ultimately our rest is found in Him, in heaven, then our hope is weakened. If we fail to take advantage of this path that He has provided that leads us directly into the very throne room of God, then our hope is weakened. I mean, what do we call that? Prayer, usually, right? You know, I'll let you in on a secret. You don't even have to bow your head. You don't even have to close your eyes. You can just step right in to the very throne room of God Almighty. You see, when we ignore that, when we forget that, when we set that aside, our hope is weakened. I mean, think of it this way. If you might want to pick your feet up because this might hurt just a little bit. If you have ever said, if you are first of all a believer in Jesus Christ, and you have ever said, "Oh, I'm all alone," you are wrong. And you don't understand who He is. Because He stands with us. He stands beside us. And if you believe that if you are a child of God and you believe you're alone, I'm sorry, but you're looking at the wrong things. Your focus is in the wrong place. It doesn't mean that your circumstances aren't difficult. Don't hear me wrong. Don't walk out of here, saying, "Oh, the pastor doesn't care that I'm hurting." I get it. I understand it. But if we fixate on those things, the very first thing that evaporates is our hope. And our enemy wants nothing more, nothing greater than to take our hope and toss it away. You see, if we don't keep what the author of Hebrews says, what he refers to as this great salvation that He has provided, if we don't keep that at the forefront of our minds and our hearts, we not only lose hope, but we lose perspective. You see, if we don't keep our eyes fixed on Him, we lose our way. And we'll get to that. I think he talks about that specifically, doesn't he? A little bit later in this message. You see, because those who, you remember what the author says? Those who come to God through Him, that is Jesus Christ, they are saved, he said, not in part, but completely. Absolutely. And for them, for us, for you and I, if you are a child of God because of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and He is always, he says, always standing in the gap, interceding on our behalf. You see, He's able to do this. Why? Well, He helps us understand why. Because He's greater than the angels. He's greater than Moses. Because He is faithful. Because He is the Word of God. Because He's sharper than any two-edged sword. All of these things that He has highlighted along the way. Again, His point is not to give us some theological information. His point is to take us from theology to practice so that we implement it, we live it out. This is the one who lives in us. You can't. Do you get the heart of this pastor as he's delivering this message? He's saying if you lose sight of this, it's no wonder you're on the edge of a cliff. But he goes on and he says, He's able to meet all of these needs. Why? Well, because He is better than anything and anyone. He is holy, he says. He is blameless. He is undefiled. He is separate from sinners. He has become higher than the heavens. And I mean, on and on and on he goes. And the results of this, I mean, we'll see this clearer, in the days ahead. But essentially, the result, we heard it in the passage that Brianna read earlier. We heard it in the words of the songs that we sang, and we heard it in the words here. He does not need to go over and over and over again back and offer himself as a sacrifice. Because he's better. Because he's sinless. And so it is this one. I mean, do we understand this? It is this one who walked, into the very presence of God, into the Holy of Holies, and placed his own blood on the mercy seat. We'll get into some of this, if some of those, words and pictures kind of confuse you a bit. We'll get into some of this in the weeks ahead. But the short version is this. The mercy seat is where the blood of a sacrifice was placed. And the idea is that God's presence would look down upon the covenant that was underneath that mercy seat. And he would see how his people had broken that covenant, but he would see it through the lens of the blood of the sacrifice. And it is his blood that he poured out on that mercy seat and declared from the cross, it is finished. Actually, that's not true. He declared tetelestai is the word. One word is the only word that he said. And do you know what that word means? Paid in full. It was a word from the financial world, from the banking world, that you would see stamped across, a mortgage when you paid it off. Paid in full. And when that happened, this new and better hope was born. And this new and better covenant was sealed. You see, hope springs to life because we don't have to do it on our own, right? I think we sang something like that a little while ago, didn't we? It's not about what we can do. Hope springs to life because it is served to us on a plate of grace. Undeserved. And hope springs to life because there is no one greater in the entire universe. And he has become the guarantee of something better. And he brings hope. Why? Because he is hope. And according to our author, hope doesn't get any better than the Son of God laying down his own life so that we can draw near to God. Remember, that's the point of this, right? In verse 19, through which we draw near to God. That was the whole point of the sacrificial system. It's the whole point of our Bibles, was so that we could walk in relationship with Almighty God. Hope doesn't get any better than salvation that has its roots in eternity, that draws its strength not from some inherited position, but from a promise of God himself. And hope doesn't get any better than to have it authored by the one who is greater than anything else. You wonder, why does the author of Hebrews keep going back and repeating himself? Why do I keep going back and repeating him? I don't know. Am I repeating myself or him? I don't know. Anyways, why do we keep saying it? Because it is so important. You see, hope is found in him. See, I could have just said that and we could all have been eating lunch by now. You see, to a group of people who are on the edge of a cliff, our author says, on one hand, you can choose to live a life in a lifeless past, filled with lifeless tradition and lifeless repetition. And you will find yourself living on the edge of a cliff. But on the other hand, he tells them, you have the opportunity for something so much better. Something that will take you right into the very presence of the living God. And there you will find yourself living with a better hope. And so what I would say to us this morning is simply this. You choose which hand you're going to take. You choose which hand you're going to live.